Hello and welcome to Hammerheads. It's Werewolf Wednesday with me, Marcus Wilson, and him, Miles Watts.
Oh,
The horror man and him. So whatever the day of the week is with you, pull up a pew, get comfortable as we explore the curse of the werewolf, while we revisit the BFI's list of best Hammer horror films, 1957 to 1974, the golden years of Hammer. So, Miles, werewolf or werewolf?
I like werewolf, but partly because of the continuing joke in Young Frankenstein. Werewolf, there, wolf. Why are you talking like that? Sorry, I thought you wanted to. Yeah, well, I've always said werewolf, although in my favorite werewolf movie, which you can probably guess which one that is, they say werewolf and werewolf depending on who says it, whether they are from America or London. There's a clue.
There you go. When you say werewolf, I say werewolf. Let's call the whole thing off.
Okay, see ya.
And by this time, Hammer seem to have settled well and truly on their naming conventions for each release. It seems to be the Creepy Noun 1 of the Creepy Noun 2.
Yes, yeah, the Brides of Dracula, or the horror of something, or
the underpants of Satan. By this point, apparently, they were going to movie theaters and sort of pitching and sort of saying, well, if we called a film this, would you put it in your run?
Oh, really?
Yeah. So the name often, I think, seemed to come before the actual film and script at this point.
And this one as well it's referenced in American Werewolf in London. There's a scene where Jenny Agutter and David Naughton are in bed, and they've just been having a lovely time and a shower, and just basically getting clean. And he is aware that he might be a werewolf, and he says to her, "Have you seen The Wolf Man?" And she says, "Is that the one with Oliver Reed?"
Yes.
And he says, "No, it's the one where Bela Lugosi bites Lon Chaney Jr."
Yes.
And so I always was aware of Curse of the Werewolf because of that comment, but I've only just seen it today. So it's another one of those in this list that I don't know why I haven't seen it. I assumed I'd seen it, but I think the one I saw was that Lon Chaney Jr. one from 1941.
And there's a few firsts here because
yes.
I think this is the first and only werewolf film made by Hammer.
I think you're right.
And it was the first leading role for Oliver Reed.
That's right.
The starring role.
And also the first werewolf film made in color.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Very good. Now, you mentioned The Wolfman there. I went back and watched The Wolfman with Lon Chaney Jr. and Claude Rains, and that was very underwhelming, I thought. It's quite a short film, and it's quite small in its scope. It sort of all seems to be filmed on kind of quite a small studio lot. It's set in Wales, and it doesn't have a great deal. I wasn't such a fan, so I went back to a film that Universal made even before that, Werewolf of London in 1935. Which I thought was actually really good. That has a much wider scope. It starts off in the plains of Tibet. The guy who gets bit by the werewolf in Tibet is a scientist, again, sort of messing with nature, that kind of theme. And it's quite a big film, certainly for 1935. But for me, werewolves were really almost like a B-list monster for you've got these huge literary giants like literary sources for Dracula, literary sources for Frankenstein, The Hound of the Baskervilles, and then there are sort of these, for me, what I'm kind of calling the B-list monsters, the mummies and the werewolves that are kind of don't have that sort of backing. I always think of the werewolf legend kind of almost as being a bit Jekyll and Hyde kind of thing, but mixed with folklore.
Yes, I was going to say Jekyll and Hyde there, definitely, and especially in Curse of the Werewolf, there's a very Jekyll. I mean, you could replace, in a way, you could replace the werewolf with Mr. Hyde, because it seems to be based a little bit on Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in that when he turns, obviously he doesn't take a pill or anything or a potion, he just turns when it's the full moon. he becomes a sort of a ferocious beast that looks like a wolf, but it's a sort of lustful,
Yes.
vicious beast. So he attacks people and is beastly rather than wolf-like.
Yes.
Um, but he looks a bit like he looks like a man wolf rather than a wolf, which they did a lot later on. They started making, especially in American Werewolf in London, they made him into a beast rather than a man wolf.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. And thinking back to, well, Werewolf of London in 1935 and The Wolfman in 1941, the Universal pictures, those seem to be very straightforward in, man gets bitten by wolf, man starts
Mm.
turning into werewolf. Whereas the origin story of this particular beast in The Curse of the Werewolf is a bit more convoluted, isn't it? I'm not quite sure I understand, but maybe you have a
Yeah.
better grip on it.
Well, yeah, it's one of those films that I would say almost like an hour in, I was thinking, we've had no werewolf action. No one's been bitten apart from when the main character was a little boy.
Mm.
Leon was a little boy. Animals started going. He's in a hunting thing. He got the taste for blood. Animals start going missing. You think, okay, he's a wereboy. Although actually that means man boy. So no, he's a young werewolf. And then of course he grows up and the curse starts to come back, but it is a curse as well. So the first 20 minutes of the movie is all to do with this awful man and his wife making fun of this old traveler, the beggar, who comes to his big castle, and it's almost like a different movie. And
Mm.
then it leads up to about half an hour in, the daughter of the jailer, who is the only person who remembers that this beggar is in the cells, comes down, and she's very pretty, and he gives in and, well, rapes her. I guess he attacks her,
Mm.
and so therefore her child is cursed, and that's how the werewolf's curse starts, which is a very convoluted way of. You could have just had, other films, it's always he gets bitten or you get scratched, you become a werewolf, but in this it seems to be the curse of the werewolf was brought about through this man's, unless he, of course, there is an inference that he was a werewolf, but it's not
Yeah.
at all touched upon. You that would be a bit of a stretch to say that man is a werewolf, I guess.
I mean, it's pretty grim in that there's like an attempted rape and then an actual rape within the first
Mm,
hour of the film.
mm,
And there's also this sort of insinuation that the birth of this child is on Christmas Eve, and therefore it's somehow trying to upstage our
Jesus.
Savior, and and
Yeah.
um, and that is a bad omen in itself. So Hammer seemed to have really gone back to a lot more kind of like folklore type sources, like more
Mm,
elemental stuff than much more convoluted than the original Hollywood pictures as well. And it seems to have
yeah.
been based on this novel, The Werewolf in Paris, which seems to have been
Yeah.
a pretty grim novel by this American writer called Guy Endor in
Mm.
1933, which also is full of incest and rape, and you kind of wonder how Hammer ever thought they could get it past the censor.
Yeah, and they didn't want to repurpose or rebuild any of their sets, so
Yeah.
they set it in Madrid, because they could get away with the existing sets looking like Madrid. Um, but yeah, it occurs to me at the beginning when the man that this he attacks uh, the daughter of the jailer. Has he been down there for so long? I suppose he could be already a werewolf.
I don't
Because she
think
has a
so.
big
I mean, this
scratch across her chest.
there isn't really a kind. I mean, obviously he's been brutalized by being in
Mm,
there. He's been ridiculed by the laird of the place and thrown
yeah.
in the dungeon for many years. Um, the laird has tried to rape this servant girl and thrown her into
Mm,
the. So yeah, it's all full of this kind of horrendousness and menace and just pretty unpalatable, really, for the first half. Um,
yeah.
but it's actually quite convoluted as well because it's set over three different time periods. You get the
Mm,
beggar man arriving at the this village on the laird's wedding day,
yeah.
being abused and mocked, and then you get him sort of grown old in the dungeons,
Mm,
and then there's the rape scene, and then you see little Leon growing up, and then you kind of jump forward into his adulthood and him going off to find his fortune.
Yeah, and you see when he becomes Oliver Reed, which is about an hour into the movie, I think it's about 55 minutes in. You think, oh well, I mean, he's obviously going to go off and realize he's a wolf, which is sort of what they did for American Werewolf in London, which is he's been cursed, he's aware of the curse, and then it comes back to haunt him when he's a bit older. Um, but yeah, I thought it was very odd. But it's like because it's a 95-minute movie, as a lot of these early Hammer films are, which is kind of
Mm,
perfect length for these kind of movies because they
mm,
tend to stash everything into the last half hour for the showdown. And
yeah.
I thought what this film did really well was that third act because it was such a slow build up. You know, he's a monster, he's a brute. Da, 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 da. Then when he turns finally at the end, when you see him turn, he's turned a couple of times, but just off camera. It's actually quite an impressive sight to see this beast wolfman being chased by villagers with pitchforks and going up the building, and it's very sort of Hunchback of Notre Dame, Metropolis, that kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely
And
the
I
bell
thought
tower certainly is quite a
the
hunchback,
bell
isn't it?
tap. So I thought the last act of this movie was the best one. It built up, built up, built up, and then it definitely crescendoed at the end, which is fantastic.
Yeah, you
Um,
kind of like over the first half of the film, you're kind of wondering where it's going because it's almost like the people who you think are going to be the main protagonists in it gradually get killed off, and it's like,
yeah,
oh, it's not. The film isn't about them; it's about somebody. And then kind of Oliver Reed comes on the screen. It's like, oh, it's about him.
yeah, yeah. It's almost like you don't meet the hero until if you think about films like The Howling or America Werewolf in London, you meet the heroes very early on. And
Mm,
so what you get to know them in the first 10 minutes, then when it happens to them, you're like, oh no, they've been attacked. And then you suffer with them because they're dreading what's going to happen, or they start to suspect what they are. Whereas with this, he's a kid werewolf who doesn't quite deal with it. And obviously when he comes of age, he's not affected by it. But I think he realizes when he meets is it Christina, the girl that he loves,
yes.
eventually she has a calming influence on him, and he sort of realizes that that's what's kept him sane. I think when she is taken away, he just
Yeah.
goes mad and breaks out of jail. And he said, but he's aware what he is. He's please kill me. He's already, he realizes he's killed, which is again was quite an influence on American Werewolf in London because there's a scene in that where David is locked. He wakes up in the zoo and he realizes he's gone in there after a killing spree to be with the wolves.
Yeah.
So they're very different movies, but it feels like. And I mention American Werewolf London a lot because to me it's the greatest werewolf movie. I think a
Yes.
lot of people would agree it's kind of the pinnacle. I think
Yeah.
everything that's come after and everything that went before is kind of this triangle going up and then back down
Yeah.
again from it.
Yeah.
It just was this very witty uh, milestone of werewolf lore, but it was very loyal. It had
Yeah.
they make jokes about it. They say, "Do I need a silver bullet or something?" And he
Yeah.
goes, "Oh, be serious," because obviously they've seen the same movies we have, like Curse of the Werewolf, because they mentioned it.
Yeah, that's
Um,
you're absolutely right. I think to say it builds upon these other films. I think that
mm,
the old Universal films, particularly The Wolfman,
yeah.
doesn't have much depth to it. In fact, the Werewolf of London has more depth to it. I think this
Mm,
film kind of the Leon's character is very brooding. He
yeah.
is very ill at ease, and Oliver Reed does all of that really well. There's more of that kind of brooding coming just kind of palpably off the screen than there is
Mm,
in the early Universal pictures. There's they're kind of morality tales. These earlier films, the Universal ones and this, it was sort of about uh, certainly in the Wolfman, the Werewolf of London, it was about the main protagonist not having time for his wife. He's a
yes.
scientist, and he's basically not paying her any attention. So there's this love triangle, and there is also this love triangle in all three of these earlier movies.
Yeah.
That there is um, the werewolf has some kind of object of their affections, but there's
Yeah.
another guy involved, and will he lose the woman to this other guy, or will he win
Yeah.
the woman from the other guy? So there's all of that kind of stuff, and it does hinge upon kind of morality, and maybe that's to kind of get around the censor to an extent.
I think maybe because they weren't comfortable because I remember when Stevenson wrote Jekyll and Hyde, it was very Victorian,
Yeah.
buttoned down, forbidden time, and it's really about the beast within and sexuality and
Yes.
lust and also things like homosexuality and just the hidden self, basically.
Yeah, you
Jekyll
had
and
to have
Hyde.
some kind of moral message. And I
Yeah.
think what American Werewolf in London does then is that it kind of throws out that morality tale, and that's what
Mm,
makes it a lot more scary as a movie. Yes, it has all the humor and it has all this looking back on the heritage of werewolf movies, but
mm.
it also doesn't have that kind of clear cut, oh well, this guy is a bit of a he's kind of not doing right by his woman, so he's going to get his comeuppance. It actually feels very unfair, the
It
American
does.
Werewolf in London.
Yeah, you feel so sorry for David because he's such a nice guy, and
Yeah.
but they do a lot of things that they do in the Wolfman. In other words, like they shoot him at the end, and then
Yeah.
he's human. That's the same. There's things like I love that. Obviously, the slaughtered lamb scenes are some of the best scenes ever because they're so funny, but so creepy. If you walked into, we've all walked into that pub. I've walked into that pub,
Yeah.
not that actual pub, but the one where you basically walk in and the darts freeze in midair until you sit down and order a pint of stout, and then
You made me
made me
miss.
miss. I've never missed that board before.
Mm.
Yeah, and all of the lore of werewolfness is tied up into slaughtered lamb scenes in American Werewolf. They're talking about
Yeah.
pentangles and they're talking
Yeah.
about the mark of the wolf man and all this kind of stuff. So they sort of get it out the way and they laugh at it. All these ridiculous, all this folklore, this ridiculous stuff that they're talking about, and they go, "Oh, it's a story about werewolves, sir." Oh, really? And it's like, but it's true. So we're laughing at it with them, but we know it's real.
Yes.
Whereas these films, Curse of the Werewolf and The Wolfman, they sort of dig it. And I love that, for example, American Werewolf, and I don't know what other film did this, starts with a monster attack, and then the monster becomes a human again, and you see him lying there next to David. That I
Yes.
always loved because in one shot you're like, he was the previous wolf. That's all you needed to know, that he was the previous wolf, and now it's
Yes.
David.
Yes.
And that's how he's going to end up, and indeed he does.
Yes, it's more
So,
it's simpler in a way that it doesn't have this all well born on a Christmas Eve and like I had this misfortune in the way he was
no,
conceived, and yeah,
no,
it dispenses with some of that.
there's another similarity in that Oliver Reed starts saying, "I've been having strange dreams." I think it's when Leon is a kid, actually.
Yeah,
Starts
that's
saying, "I've been
right.
having weird dreams about blood and eating and feeding." And obviously, another thing they do in American Werewolf is they really take that to the nth degree, where they show David having these horrendous nightmares about his family being murdered by sort of Nazi demons, and he
Yeah.
imagines himself running through the forest eating deer and that kind of thing. So I think John Landis must have really paid attention to all the movies that came before,
Yeah.
like this, because they mentioned that.
Well, I mean, it obviously has a nod to just through the title, the Werewolf of London.
Mm,
But again, the Werewolf of London is more of a Jekyll and Hyde type thing because it's almost high society London, and it's this guy obviously has this curse of the werewolf on him, but
right.
can't show that in public in polite society. So
Yeah, I don't think I've seen that one, but I'm definitely going to have to now
I
because
I would really recommend it. It's a
yeah,
great movie.
I will see it. And I also, Dog Soldiers has just been reissued as well. So I want to see that. There's a new print of that, and that's a good fun one. Uh, Neil Marshall, director.
Yes,
Um,
I remember seeing that. Yes.
and they're upright werewolves, almost to the point where it's drawing attention to the fact that there are men in wolf outfits, but they're creepy and tall, and they've got these horrible claws. Um,
Yeah, well, obviously, kind of, yeah, CGI and makeup has come on over the years, but I mean, there was films such as The Beast Must Die in the
oh,
1974, and
let's talk about The Beast Must
let's
Die.
talk about The Beast Must Die because that is very much an animal werewolf. It's not a sort of a human standing werewolf, so a
Mm.
very bad animal in a way. I think it looks like a kind of black Labrador or something.
I think they were, or they were German shepherds or something, but it was like
Yes.
and they just put little wigs on them, and on the whole, on the face of it, it's ridiculous. But when I was a kid, I watched that film. It was on late night Channel 4 or something. I recorded it off the telly and watched it. And obviously, you and I both now have it on disc, and we watch it, maybe every couple of years, but we
Yeah, yeah.
mention it. It's quite a scary film because of the setup, but It's just brilliant. It's Amicus, which is the other
Yes.
great British horror studio of the 60s and 70s, Amicus, and it's got Peter Cushing in it, and it's just a brilliant setup. Calvin Lockhart is this rich guy who's trying to test who's come out to his house. He invites people out to his house like a whodunit, decides who's going to be who's the werewolf. We're going to have to find out and kill them.
It
During the
does turn
werewolf
it
break.
into a bit of a whodunit.
It does, but it's a good werewolf movie. It's a good addition to the werewolf movie because it is creepy enough, and it has the hairs on the hairs on the palms and everything.
A blaxploitation werewolf horror whodunit.
Yeah, but the fact that Peter Cushing's in it lends it a bit more credo, I think. But yeah, I think that's one. I think when it starts, it's almost off-putting because it's got this sort of 70s disco music in it. And but it's a good part of the werewolf pantheon, I would say. And I think Curse of the Werewolf is one of those that I would show to someone if they wanted to, not necessarily werewolf lore, but how does Curse of the Werewolf fit in with the whole kind of, like you say, Jekyll and Hyde beast within thing. Obviously,
or even sort of Beauty and the Beast, sort of going back to I was watching John Cocteau's Belle et la Bête as well, 1946.
Gorgeous. Yeah, it is like that. It's how can you love a beast? And what I thought they were going to do was have the girl kill the wolf at the end of the Curse of the Werewolf, because again, that happens in the Wolfman. It happens in American Werewolf, and there's a great line in American Werewolf, which is actually just quite sad. Is when they're sat in bed and he just says, ends up being Lon Chaney Jr.'s father that kills him.
Yes.
In the Wolfman, and he says, I
believe it's it's the police inspector, I think, in Werewolf of London.
It's basically MI5, isn't it? They all just and the wolf sort of looks like he's going to go for Alex, but yeah, and then he says that line, I think a wolf can only be killed by someone who loves him, which is a very curious line, but it sort of ties in with Curse of the Werewolf because Christina obviously has some kind of understanding and some kind of connection to Leon. And I
think in the earlier films, it sort of flips that on its head by saying the werewolf always goes after the one it loves the most as well.
Sure, right, yes, which he doesn't do in the ones we're talking about. He runs away in shame. Yes. He's ashamed of being a werewolf. That's so in both these films, American Werewolf and Curse of the Werewolf, they run away because they're ashamed. But Ollie Reed, 2 years before he got into that big fight and got all his face cut up, I noticed his face is very clear and smooth in his first feature role, starring role. So he looks very beautiful.
He's kind of a blank slate in this, isn't he? Which works pretty well.
But he's got that great, and he's got those intense blue eyes. Even when he dies and he's the wolf, the dead wolf, you can see those eyes. Yes. He had the bluest eyes, and it's he's got an incredible face, and he's very good in it. He has to do some ridiculous things in it. He has to be like, pull ridiculous faces and go and knock things over like Creatures in the Black Lagoon or something. But he's believable.
We should come back and speak more about the transformation scenes, but that will have to be after the werewolf break.
Oh,
this is the werewolf break. Have you guessed who the werewolf is? Is it Paul Foot, Jan, Davina, Dr. Lundgren, Caroline? You have 30 seconds to give your answer. Made up your mind? Let's see if you're right.
Okay, so we're back. So that transformation scene, I thought that it was probably the worst transformation sequence to date in a werewolf movie. You've kind of got these plastic motionless hands that you see on Oliver Reed, which seems a bit of a shame when the earlier Universal films, albeit they probably had much higher budgets, but they did some quite intricate camera cutting. So, for instance, in Wolfman of London, you get this transformation happening as this guy walks through a series of arches, and each arch kind of represents this cut to a more progressed werewolf makeup each time.
Oh, clever. That's good. So now I have to watch. That sounds very innovative.
It was very innovative. And then in Wolfman, obviously, you've got the sort of fading as the hair grows. And I
always liked that. It's a kind of a classic, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where it obviously it's different stages of makeup, they dissolve between them, but it's very clever, good lighting and stuff.
But in this one, you've sort of got Oliver Reed looking a bit like a Womble, like it's Uncle Bulgaria or something. Particularly on the video artwork that I've got, the sleeve artwork, he does look particularly like Uncle Bulgaria there.
Yeah, they'd kind of saddled themselves with the wolf man, hadn't they? You know, he's a man and he's got the head of a wolf and some hair.
And they do seem to have based it pretty much on the Wolfman makeup. I think by this time Universal by this time distributing Hammer in the States or something, so they were more able to take on the makeup from Universal, I think.
Yeah, maybe. And then of course, in the 80s we got The Howling, which is Joe Dante's movie, which is very good. I watched it recently. It's a bit silly. I'm a big fan of Joe Dante films. It's a bit silly because I don't know, there's just lots of werewolves bonking and groups of werewolves going werewolves.
I read that he named the characters from the directors of the earlier werewolf films. So Terry Fisher is the character in The Howling.
Yeah, I mean, what's quite good is that, I mean, it's a comedy. It's kind of a comedy. Like, it's got Dee Wallace, E.T.'s mum, and Robert Picardo is the werewolf. And what happens, it turns out, is that she saw a werewolf and it's freaked her out. And it gradually she tells the story of how she saw this wolf and he transforms, and she didn't run away for 5 minutes. She just stood and watched him transform. It's a very good transformation. There's proper bladders and all this stuff happening in the head, and then at the end, she reveals, spoiler, she's been bitten. She's a werewolf, and she transforms on the news, so, and everyone's watching it. So it's quite a funny ending. And I think it was going to be, at the same time, it was going to be Rick Baker doing the makeup, but he did Werewolf in London instead. I think that's the story. And obviously got the Oscar for it and stuff. But
because that's London, the transformation.
It still is. It's all practical. Yeah, they cut lots of different cuts, but it's very brilliantly made. They don't try and do it all in one shot like they did in American Werewolf in Paris, which is just terrible CGI, very early CGI. And then, the Wolfman in the noughties as well, which a friend of mine actually worked on. And he spent a lot of time making teeth and claws and so forth. And they just replaced it all with CGI because the studio second guessed it and said, no. And that's a shame, because it's best when you augment practical effects with CGI rather than just replacing practical effects with CGI. I don't see the point. But still, American Werewolf is still the best transformation. Yeah, you're right. The Curse of the Werewolf is possibly the worst transformation ever, because all you see is him rip his shirt. You see these two silly plastic hands for 20 seconds.
Yeah.
And then he's got the makeup on, which the makeup is quite good.
That's it. If they didn't hold those stills kind of for quite as long. Although apparently Oliver Reed used to keep his makeup on when he went home at night, and he used to enjoy frightening fellow drivers.
I bet he did, actually. I can imagine Ollie Reed doing that. Yes, he was a notorious hellraiser. He was the scourge of a New York City.
And then at the end of the film, you almost left hanging. I mean, this is a thing about a lot of the Hammer horror films that we've seen to date. It takes a long time to meticulously build the mood and the atmosphere, and then the like last 5 minutes is
we'll kill him.
Kind of rushed. And
they're all sitting around going, well, he dies. That's how it ends. So we'll have a chase, and then he's dead.
It's all really abrupt often at the end. And you don't really find out what happens to Christina, who, is she fated to marry this half-wit Rico now?
Rico, yeah. Some notable things to mention, and you pointed this out before I knew he was in it, but there is someone in this movie who is also in another Were movie, which is Peter Sallis, who not only stars
Yes,
in
oh
Curse of the
yes,
Werewolf, also stars
Were
in Curse of
Rabbit.
the Were-Rabbit, which is
Yeah, I
an
hadn't thought about that.
amazing one of the. I think Curse of the Were-Rabbit is one of the most amazing animated films ever. It is just perfect, and Peter Sallis obviously plays Wallace, and he
I hadn't
becomes
made that connection. Yeah.
Oh, well, I only did while I was watching it, and also I really like the score by Benjamin Frankel because it's got that. And there's probably, film music fans will know there's some kind of the way it was. It was the first film to use a kind of 12 step motif, I think. But it's what it reminded me of two things. One is The Fly by Howard Shore, because The Fly is very much an old-fashioned horror score. Da, 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 that kind of thing.
Is this what 12-tone serialism is? Because I was reading this.
12-tone serialism.
Maybe one of our listeners will write in and tell us what the hell that is. But
yeah, 12-tone serialism, that's correct. And so The Flight, and also there's a sort of primal boom, 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 boom music, which is used for the wolf, which is also used by Julian Knott in Curse of the Were-Rabbit. So I think they were all aware that it's that kind of great that basically because the rabbit beats his chest in Curse of the Were-Rabbit because it's his feral bunny nature. Every time you see the rabbit or there's a chase with the rabbit, it's boom, 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 boom when he's chasing him under the ground. And they use it in this, which is sort of meant to be this primal heartbeat, I think, or just something primal, which I think is just brilliant. So as a film nerd, I recognize those two.
Well, there are other interesting. It's a huge cast because it obviously covers quite a span of years, and a lot of stuff, random stuff, is going on in there. But the other UK TV comedy actor who you may or may not have spotted is Warren Mitchell as the gamekeeper Pepe Valiant.
I did not spot that as Warren Mitchell. No.
Yeah,
I barely recognized Peter Sallis until it was a close-up of him, and I was like, "Is that? Ah, yes." He didn't sound like him. He didn't look like him. But no, I didn't know Warren Mitchell was.
Yeah, he works as the gamekeeper on Don Enrique's estate. There is also the beggar at the start who gets locked up is Richard Wordsworth, who apparently is the great-great-grandson of the poet William Wordsworth.
I mean, that's pretty good, isn't it?
That's pretty good. If you're going to be anyone's great-great-grandson.
Wordsworth, yes. And also I was looking at this, the cinematographer, because I obviously had to look up quite a few of the cast members and crew members just to be sure, because I'm not Edgar Wright. I don't know everything. Arthur Grant was the cinematographer. He also did Quatermass and the Pit, which is one of the best British horror movies of all time.
Yes.
And I thought it looked very beautiful. And again, those Bray Studio sets are just fantastic. I mean, they're getting a lot of use out of them at this point. Yes, because about 10 movies.
Because this was supposed to be a movie about the Spanish Inquisition, but it was they weren't able to make it, I think, because it was at the church in Rome or something. Anyway, they were, for some reason, they weren't able to make it. So that's why it became the set for this film, or this story was transplanted to Spain, although it is obviously West London.
It's funny. It's almost two movies, Curse of the Werewolf, because you've got this big long setup, and then you've got this 30-minute. It reminded me of the Curse of Frankenstein, actually, where Peter Cushing in that film, which is in episode 1. If you haven't listened to it yet, go back 4 episodes, listen to Curse of Frankenstein. Is another curse of. He's in jail. He's saying, "I'm killed. I'm responsible. I created this awful monster." And it reminded me of that. In that this film ends with Leon in the jail, going, "Lock me up. You're going to have to execute me. I'm a killer." So it felt like it was a little bit of retreading of that storyline.
Yes, that's right.
So it doesn't get points for originality. But I did enjoy that last 10 minutes. I thought that last 10 minutes climbing around on rooftops and shouting and jeering.
Quite a big production, wasn't it? Towards the end,
it was slow as hell for the first 45 minutes, which I do not mind, especially in a 95-minute movie. You're like, well, we're halfway through. I know what's I know what's going to happen now. Things are going to step up. But it wasn't it wasn't as good as, say, what did we watch last week? We watched the one with the ghastly old woman.
Brides of Dracula.
The Brides of Dracula. That had this fantastically creepy build-up with great set pieces and great characters.
Yeah.
Whereas I think this one lacked a little bit. You weren't too interested in Leon's family and him growing up as a kid, really.
Yeah.
But it definitely built to a nice place, I thought.
And I like that it was quite broad in its scope. I mean, it wasn't. I mean, there are bits that were obviously Bray Studio, which we've seen in other movies, but
Yeah.
it felt a lot broader than that. That the action was happening in multiple places. And did you spot the Bond connection? In fact, two Bond connections.
I did spot old Desmond Llewellyn,
Yeah, cute.
who I was watching last night in Some Others Do Have 'Em. Frank Spencer goes to some RAF reunion and Desmond Llewellyn's there, which I thought was fantastic. And what a great voice he's got as well.
Yes.
And who's the other one?
Anthony Dawson, who plays the Marquis at the start, apparently is from Russia with Love and Thunderball Blofeld.
Ah, okay. I didn't think I recognized him, but I did think what a brilliant bastard he was.
He was a brilliant bastard, wasn't he? He was so
awful.
good. Yeah.
That first 10 minutes where they take in the old soak and they tease him and they make him dance for food and stuff. I thought, well, I hate this guy, so he's doing a very good job.
Yes. Oh, and that reminds me, another good reason to watch Werewolf of London. There are two ladies in that film who are just mums on the gin, and they are just hilarious. There's just the section in that film that is, I mean, I think that Werewolf of London for me has a lot of pathos and it's well paced, but it also has a load of great comedy in it as well. So that's my tip for anyone who wants to watch a movie off the back of this.
It sounds great. Is it sort of noirish?
It's kind of, yeah, it is. I mean, it's 1935, but it feels very much ahead of its time.
Great. Oh, well, that sounds fantastic. I'm definitely going to check that one out. I would suggest, if you haven't seen Curse of the Werewolf, definitely watch it. I'd say The Beast Must Die, and then American Werewolf in London, if you're going for a sort of 60s, 70s, 80s werewolf continuation there. And then if you want something ridiculous, you can go for The Howling, which I sound like I'm down on The Howling, but I do enjoy it. Joe Dante is one of my favorite directors. I think it was just a bit daft and implausible in places for me, whereas American Werewolf in London is just a classic. It's terrifying, it's funny, and it's really sad.
Yeah,
you really
love
the characters.
It is truly terrifying, but hilarious with it. So yeah, absolutely agreed on that. And so next time, what do we have for you? We have Herbert Lom in 1962's The Phantom of the Opera.
Oh, nice. Do you know what? I know the story, but I haven't seen a lot of versions of that. So I think I saw a concert film of the Michael Crawford one in the 90s because it was televised.
Oh, right, okay.
Or excerpts from it or something. And I'm sure I read the book at some point, but it was a long time ago. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that. And Herbert Lom, does he play the Phantom?
I assume so.
And he goes gradually mad because his bumbling underling, played by Peter Sellers, is just ruining the opera. And his eye starts twitching. Oh no, hang on. Wrong series. Well, I'll look forward to that one then.
So will I. We'll be glad that that's free of any Lloyd Webber connections.
Yes. Well, look, thank you very much for listening again. If you've got this far, please leave us a message or send us requests or share your own movie loves and hates and so forth. If you've got a werewolf movie you want to recommend that we haven't mentioned, because I'm sure there's loads, then go ahead. I think I'm going to watch Dog Soldiers over the next week as well. And I haven't seen that for a while either. So yeah, I shall look forward to the next episode. 1962 already.
It certainly is. Enjoy, my friend. I will see you next time.
Catch you next week.
When the wolfman came to town, he ate the princess and her crown. If you ask him why, Wolfman will just because I can. Just because I can. Just because you fit the bill. Just because a look can kill. Just because I will. Just because I will. Ever since the world began. Ever since